Welcome to It's About Time. This is where we challenge outdated higher education models and push for bold, student-first reforms. In this series, we sit down with top policy leaders and innovators to rethink success in higher education and explore how we can break free from outdated structures. Today, we're joined by James Kvaal, the former U.S. Undersecretary of Education and a leading voice in higher education policy. Our conversation will focus on innovation in higher education and the role of the federal policy in creating change that will benefit students. So let's dive in. You're in a transition right now, and I wanted to ask a kind of reflection type of question. As you think back on your period of employment and commitments as the Undersecretary, what comes to mind as some of the most important things that you needed to address in terms of accountability and making sure that students are getting the outcomes that we intend them to get, and kind of think about it as you think back on those days. What's your takeaway on the role, a regulatory role, in terms of accountability for the department?
Yeah. Well, traditionally, the federal role has been focused on student aid and financing. And when it comes to outcomes, or accountability, the question has been, what institutions or what programs have outcomes that are so poor that students shouldn't be able to get financial aid to go there. And that is focused on sort of financial safety and soundness, as well as default rates, and then, more recently, the debate over the gainful employment standards. And that is, I think, a critical role. The federal government, I think, should do more on the question of, once you are above that minimum standard, how can we support colleges and universities to get even stronger? But that's I think a relatively new question as far as what the federal government's role is in supporting colleges in that way.
So what advice would you give in terms of how do we get to that outcomes-based approach and at the same time remove some of the process, delivery model regulations that are associated with that? I mean, one of the ways we've tried to control outcomes is by such things as regular and substantive interactions with faculty members, how you think about Carnegie units and seat time as a variable related to outcomes, and sometimes as related to outcomes. And I think as we move to the future, how do we disconnect those two things and really focus on outcomes?
Yeah, well, I think that's ultimately is the goal, is to be able to demonstrate what students are learning, and that we provided that. I think, even stepping away from federal policy and the department's regulations, I think we as a community are going to be under more and more pressure to demonstrate the value of what we're doing and what we're preparing our students to do. And I think that's because of concerns about student debt, concerns over social issues, but also just the pace of economic change that we're in. Students are going to want to know that an educational program will get them to the level they need to be at to continue to advance in their careers. But I think that is easier said than done. There are a lot of challenges with that. And, I know you've done a lot of work on competency-based. So, how do you think about translating traditional academic courses into demonstrated competencies?
Well, that's a great question that you've posed, and it really means getting better confidence in the outcome measures that we're talking about. Whether you're talking about financial advantages, better jobs, higher wages, those types of things that are related to the credential that you receive, or just a verification that you have the right completion rates, retention rates, completion rates, and then the value of that moving forward needs to be translated. We're so focused on how much time we spent trying to get people to learn, and not focused on kind of the issue of what's the return on that investment, that we need to do some work on understanding the currency of outcomes and those credentials, and not be so dependent upon what's easy to measure, which is how much time we spent putting a course together, having people experience that course, meet minimal standards in terms of outcomes. And then with competency-based, we also have to recognize that time matters and that people procrastinate. They're busy, especially working adults that we serve, and you have to put some guardrails around time as a metric of what you've accomplished. And doing that is not as easy as you think, and getting people on the same page relative to that is quite difficult. And there's a culture too. I mean, we all came up through a culture of Carnegie units in the fourth grade because we were the age of a fourth grader, and Carnegie units in college because we've structured our courses around that, and it's all based on how much time you've spent trying to learn. Getting around that is difficult. Even having people get their head around it is difficult. And I don't know what your experience has been with the Carnegie unit, but there's, it's such a great standardization, and time is so easy to measure that we fall back on it time and time again.
Yeah, and I agree it's second best. I mean, we do need some measure of an increment of learning. And I guess about how much a student can expect to learn in a week is a reasonable place to start. But I think for us as a field, we really want to make progress in defining those learning outcomes and measuring those learning outcomes, and that will have a whole variety of payoffs, including potential better regulation or better ways to finance higher education. But I know it's much easier said than done, and it's the leaders on it are going to have to be institutions like yours.
That's a good observation. I've been using the phrase cheaper, shorter, and easier as things we should aspire to. And you actually get a lot of pushback on easier. Why do we have such a regulatory culture and even a culture within our own institutions? And I ask this internally about our institution, where we're embarrassed to make things easier to learn. If it's easier, it's not rigorous. And it feeds into this notion that higher education should sort people based upon their ability to run the gauntlet, rather than look at the outcomes that they've achieved and the return on that investment. So do you have any insights into why this culture is so difficult to change around kind of cheaper, easier, and faster?
Yeah, it is something I think that has been inbred in higher education, and sort of the old idea that you need courses that gatekeep students, and if not everyone succeeds, that's because not everyone is college material, and maybe that's a good thing. I think that is changing. There is still some of that culture, but we also see more and more places that are taking responsibility for student success, and we see students succeeding at higher rates. The national graduation rate is up 8 percentage points over the last decade, which I think is a great unsung accomplishment. And we have a lot of bright spots that show that students can succeed at much higher rates. So I think what's important is for us to identify those places that are helping students overcome financial barriers, academic barriers, personal barriers, and really hold those up, because others might learn from them. But even more than the specific tactics that one place has used that's proven successful, we need to change the culture around what we can expect from our students, and we need to challenge other colleges to do as well or better.
Yeah, as an open access, largely open access institution, it's imperative for us to meet students where they are. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about. Is if you accept a student into your institution, you need to meet them where they are and add value to their goals and aspirations. And one of the ways we could think about doing that is based on actually failed experiment in the K-12 space, which is looking at value-added measures. How much growth did they get in a certain period of time, and is that growth, eventually going to lead them to, better opportunities? I haven't heard much conversation around growth metrics in recent years because I think mainly because it got politicized at the K-12 level, a decade ago. But this value-added movement to say if we take students and we meet them where they are, and we continue to move them towards their goals and better return on the investment, it's a difficult thing to do. But I haven't heard much language around that. Have you?
No, I haven't heard it discussed in the higher education context. And, I think one of the challenges with outcomes is often that it just takes so long to find out if a student graduates and goes on and is in the workforce, and how long do they need to be in the workforce before you can fairly measure. So it is important for us to be thinking about, what are the milestones on the way to that, that successful ultimate outcome, so that we know that students are on track and we have a feedback loop that is, months or a year as opposed to, 6 or 8 or 10 years.
So when you think about your time in office, what might the Democrats have done better in running the Department of Education? You can answer that or not, but I'll ask you the same question about Republican strategy.
Oh, I'm sure there are a lot of things that we could have done better. One thing I will say that I think is really important is attainment. And, I think that among some left of center types, there's a suspicion of institutions. And, you might have your preferred strategy of the type of institution you want to invest in, or a particular place you think is doing great work. But ultimately, the students need to get their skills and their credentials from an institution. And, I think we need to have a favored theory about who we're supporting and why and how. Because ultimately, the federal government exists to be a wind at the back of educators who are doing the real work on campus.
And what advice would you have for the new administration?
Well, I hope that they appreciate what they have at the department. They have a very talented career staff that is stretched very thin already, and that does really important work. And I hope they understand as well, some of the challenges we have in how we finance higher education. I think when we use student loans, the assumption is that the individual student is getting a positive ROI financially, and that is often the case, but it is not always the case. Students may not graduate, or they may face obstacles, or they may not even be pursuing money. They may be pursuing a career in arts or ministry or any number of other things. And so when we think about the shortcomings of the student loan program, we need to think about those types of programs that are not well suited to financing with loans, and what do we do about those? And and I think we need more investment in scholarships and other ways to achieve the non-economic purposes of higher education.
That's great. Let me change the topic and talk a bit about those that are on the front lines in higher education, which are faculty. Faculty have played a large role in the curriculum, obviously in delivering the educational model. As we move into higher levels of technology, especially AI, we're seeing the role of faculty change relatively dramatically, especially in the student-facing side of the institution. And I'm not sure that some of our legacy regulations are supportive of the right type of innovation that we need to move forward to actually lower the cost, to make it cheaper, faster, easier. How do you think about that in terms of regulations, or is that not part of the conversation at the federal level, or needs to be done more at the local level?
I think we need to explore new and better ways of doing these things. And I think if, we can help students learn more faster, we can learn more at lower cost, we ought to document that. It could be that the federal government is not the first to embrace innovation. It could be that, we need to build an evidence base first. And, there may be ways that the federal government can help support that. We, in the Biden administration, we championed evidence-based funds to test new approaches and evaluate them. And, I think that it's appropriate to have some assurance that new approaches work well before we ask students to take out loans and sort of put their own capital at risk there. But how do you think about that, David? I'm sure you're on the front lines there.
Well, it's an interesting balance in how you promote innovation and have some, and obviously we try to do pilots and get as much data and evidence as we possibly can. Sometimes that's not enough to break the cultural perception that it's important to, I hear it said over and over again, to have a great faculty member in front of every classroom. The whole notion of every classroom has changed dramatically, especially in the online space, and the notion of putting someone in front of that classroom instead of working side by side with each student on a personalized level is kind of a flawed concept, or an antiquated concept, I would say, moving forward. I think you have to think about both the federal role as well as the accreditors, and the relationship between accrediting agencies and the federal government, or even local governments, in terms of managing accountability. And we're seeing some actually interesting movement in the accreditation space towards more innovation. University of the People just got accredited last week, which has no tuition because their focus is on, can you demonstrate the skills and knowledge and pay for the assessments rather than paying for the seat time that you have experienced trying to learn those things. And so we see it opening up from an accreditation standpoint, maybe even more so than at the federal level in terms of the Department of Education. But I'd like to hear your take on that.
That's encouraging. I mean, I think for the federal government, one of the challenges is that it's all or nothing generally. Either a program is allowed to hand out tens of thousands of dollars of loans, or students don't get any help at all. And I think that's a challenge for us as we want to progress new approaches. So I think we should be thinking about, is there a way to create some kind of sandbox or venture fund where we set a high bar for the types of outcomes we expect, and we give people an opportunity to test new approaches and prove that they can do it, and then build an on-ramp onto eligibility for student aid more generally.
Yeah, the most flexibility is a declaration that you're not going to seek federal financial aid, and then it opens up new opportunities. And we've explored some of those even internationally, where students are not eligible, or we don't want them to be eligible for Title IV funding, and it increases the flexibility of what we're able to offer, and develop some evidence around the outcomes associated with that. So I think that's a promising approach.
Interesting.
What would be helpful in terms of interactions with universities, and are we doing that? How successful are universities and their representatives, their group representatives, in developing appropriate relationships and interactions with the department? And how could we get better as a group in doing that?
I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding on both sides, honestly. I think the department staff do not understand the innovation community as well as I would like them to. And I think that entrepreneurs often don't understand the department's goals or the department's processes or what a given step means in context. So I think there should be a lot more dialogue. I think it would be helpful to think about other ways to support innovation, whether it's seed funding, evaluation funding, data. What are the things the federal government can do? I also think it's really helpful to meet students, and I think that outside people who work full time in higher education, there's still some misconceptions about who we're serving and what their needs are, and the more we can do to talk about who students are beyond sort of full-time, upper middle class residential students, but who students really are these days, I think that is really helpful for policymakers too.
I think that's one of the things that we're starting to accomplish through the President's Forum, is we have a number of like-minded institutions that are student-centric in their focus, but their students, our average age student at UMass Global is undergraduates are 36 years old and graduate students are 37 years old, and they're all working. I mean, the one thing they have in common, they're an incredibly diverse group of students across most of the membership of the President's Forum, but especially at UMass Global. The one thing they have in common is they're working full-time. So to expect them to, fall in line with a set of synchronous requirements for showing up at certain periods of time, they need that increased flexibility, and we need to provide that to them without sacrificing any of the standards or expectations in terms of retention and completion. But it takes them a longer period of time. It's not 8 years, and our most successful and both proud and excited graduates, when I get to do commencement, which is my favorite day anytime we have a commencement, it's the best part of your job as a university leader. Our students bring 20, 30 people to commencement that have helped them along a journey, and many of them are in their 10th year as an undergraduate to do this. We get no credit for them for 8-year completion rates, but they are the proudest and most excited students and see the value of their work and commitment in ways that I didn't experience when I was at more traditional institutions. I mean, the expectation at traditional institutions for a 22-year-old was they were going to graduate, and if they didn't, everyone was disappointed in them. This expectation for working adults is that when you make it, you've actually made it in a significant commitment that involves so many people in your life that one of the angriest notes I got was from a student who we only gave 20 tickets to commencement. He said, "I need 40. I said, I'll give you 40. I'll give you 40 tickets, but I want to meet all 40 of your guests before commencement." And I went out before commencement. He had 40 people lined up to take a picture at commencement. So I think it reinforces your observation that people don't understand how diverse the population is that we're serving, and that not all of them fit into a traditional definition of upper middle class undergraduates who are trying to finish in 4 years, or graduate students who are in elite professions, trying to make it through a gauntlet that recognizes sorting, rather than how much you accomplished over a given period of time. So I think those are spot-on observations.
Yeah, I mean, the part of your story that I'd like to pull out is just how much college is often about families. And parents have their hopes for a better future for their children. I talk to a lot of students who are going to college while supporting their siblings, who want a better future for their own children. And, I think we know from our own lives, certainly my family history, higher education has, changed the trajectory of my family. And it's really about much more than even an individual student's success. It's about lifting up, generations of a family and a community.
Absolutely. And one additional anecdote from commencement is that I always take time to have the graduates recognize their families, friends, and loved ones who have contributed to their success. It's the only time during the ceremony where I can't get them to calm down. They get so excited, and their parents stand up in the audience, and literally the ovation from the graduates to their family and friends is the one place where I have to continually try to intervene and get back on track, the commencement. And it's the most exciting time. So I try to give them as much time as I can, but sometimes it's 5-7 minutes, where there's this constant kind of recognition of how many people it took to get them over the finish line. So it is the most exciting part as well.
That's great.
Well, James, I appreciate your time and certainly appreciate all of your service and commitment to the Department of Education. We'll keep up and see what's next for you. I'm sure it'll be exciting, and if there's any way that I can help you or the President's Forum can assist in how you move things forward, we know you're committed, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks to James Kvaal for his input and candid conversation. But the conversation doesn't stop here. If we want real change in higher education, we have to rethink the way we measure success. Share this episode, keep the discussion going, and stay tuned for more bold ideas and candid conversations on It's About Time.